Good morning.
We've got a full shot of you. I love that. However
Well,
you're doing it.
I don't know how I'm doing it. My son-in-law is here and he punched something on my phone and it made the screen bigger. I'm not sure how.
Who did that?
My son-in-law, Ellen's dad.
Oh, great. Is he there?
Visit. He's here with us. Yeah.
Great. Tell him I need him.
Okay. Rick, come tell me how you made this screen bigger.
Got a little box right there on the right-hand corner.
A little box on the right-hand corner.
Is it an iPad?
The Samsung phone.
Oh. Hello.
Hello, how are you? I don't see it on here.
Okay. She just said she could see me in a bigger picture than what I can see of her. So my screen is bigger than hers.
It's okay.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, Judy.
Hello.
Okay, that's good.
Oh, that's perfect.
All right. That's great.
We just flipped the phone over and made
Are we
it
all muted?
landscape instead of portrait.
Oh, I see.
Hello, Lawson.
Judy, can you hear
Morning, Lawson.
Hey, Lawson.
Hey. Eleanor? Hey.
Hey, wasn't that a great class Lawson did last night?
Yes. It was very good.
And Lawson,
Hello.
I'm sorry I had to leave early. I had a call I needed to take and it just happened to be then.
Murdock,
Hey,
are we all muted?
doing?
Can you unmute us?
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear everybody. Nobody's muted.
Yeah. I don't see anybody being muted, just checking that y'all can hear me.
I think are you muted? Can you unmute us?
We can hear you, Lawson.
Yeah. Okay. The question is, if you can hear me, say yes.
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 All right. I'm glad that we can all hear each other. Thank you for joining me this morning. Briefly, just quickly, has everyone gotten a copy of the book?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So today, my plan is to just kind of have a brief discussion about just COVID in general, and then kind of how this book ties into a theme of Advent. And then obviously, it's a really short book, as we all know. Lawson, can you not hear me? Lawson can't hear me.
Wait.
Oh,
Now,
Okay.
Now you can hear me?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
okay.
So what I'm wanting to do, is have a brief discussion just about COVID in general, and then how that ties into the Advent theme. And then with this being such a short book, today we're going to look at chapters 1 and 2, which I think we sent out to everybody.
Right.
And then there's going to be some homework. Uh-oh.
Oh, goodness.
Not really. But at the end, we're going to talk about something I'd like, a little exercise I'd like for each of us to do in between classes. But
Well, that's
before we
good.
get started, I'm going to open us in prayer. And I'm going to choose some prayers that I think are appropriate for the theme. So today's prayer is in the Book of Common Prayer, and it's a prayer for protection. So the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
And also with
Let
you.
us pray. Assist us mercifully, O Lord, in these our supplications and prayers, and dispose the way of your servant toward the attainment of everlasting salvation, that among all the changes and chances of this mortal life, there may ever be defended by your gracious and ready help. Through Jesus Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Amen.
So, I want to try to encourage everyone to participate, still trying to figure out how to do that best through Zoom. So I'm not going to mute anyone. You're free to mute yourself if you're afraid there's some kind of noise that's going to bother the group or something. But I just would like, it's not a big group that we have here. So if you want to talk, I'm going to just say you can talk, or if you want to raise your hand, I'll call on you. We'll just see how best that works. And so to get ready to talk about God in the pandemic, I think I'd like to have just a brief conversation about coronavirus in general and just kind of how we feel about it. I don't want this to be contentious, I guess. This is one of those issues where there's a lot of different opinions and feelings. And so I think it's okay that we share those in this setting. This is a church book study. So I'm going to assume that we're all going to, I know almost everyone on this page. I know that we're friendly and nice and all that good stuff. So yeah, I just kind of want us to talk a little bit about coronavirus. That's what we're talking about, God in the pandemic. How do we respond to that? N.T. Wright is going to try to lead us in that way. He's a bishop in the Church of England. Most of you, I'm sure, know that, maybe. A respected guy. And I like this book. So for me, I'll just get us started and say that I have gone through the gamut of coronavirus feelings of being, initially scared to death, being annoyed, knowing people that have gotten it and have lived. Thankfully, my mother-in-law, and maybe my brother-in-law also. There was a recent article where they say that they think that coronavirus was in the United States much earlier than they thought. My brother-in-law, Mike, in January was bedridden, just completely bedridden and sick, and he kept testing negative for the flu, but was running a fever and all these things. And so now we look back and go, oh my goodness, he might have had coronavirus and we didn't know it. My mother-in-law's an APN and works in a federal prison in Atlanta. And so she kind of just assumed she was going to get it, and she did, because of the prison culture around, seeing doctors and nurses, and it was just basically running through the system. And she got it, and is now on the other side of that. This is months ago and is still working, but she has some of those lingering effects where she has chest pains every once in a while that have sent her to the emergency room because she thought she was having a heart attack. Anyway, so with that, I take it very seriously. I've gotten tested once because I thought I might have been exposed, and I wasn't. and I tested negative. And we try to take precautions. And, I believe that it's real. Just gonna throw that out there. I'm not, I don't have any reservations about that. And last night, my wife and I had dinner with two friends outside, trying to maintain all these distances and everything with some heaters. There were heaters by us because it was freezing. And they're both nurses. And so they've seen a lot of people die, and hearing them talk about it. So they're not nurses in a prison. They're nurses at a COVID ward, actually, in North Carolina. And so hearing them briefly, we talked about it, that we didn't want to spend our whole time discussing that. That was like more sobering, right? I was thinking about this class the next day, and they've had some pretty intense times around that. And being nurses, they can laugh about it. I think that's how doctors and nurses sometimes make themselves feel comfortable, because of all the horrible things they've seen. And they weren't making light of it, but just hearing them talk about it, wow, it's really serious and clearly affecting them in their lives. But they're also trying to live their life too, and see friends when they can, and not be in fear completely. So anyway, that's a lot about how I feel. And if anybody wants to share, their feelings before we dive into what the theme is, please feel free.
Murdock, like you, I've been all over the place. The longer it goes on, I go through stages where I worry a lot, I'm anxious and tense, and then it's just kind of like I almost forget about it, believe it or not. And then it's, a roller coaster. It's been a roller coaster for me too.
In the very beginning, we actually were in New Orleans during Mardi Gras and ended up losing several friends my parents' age that were in a nursing home that just got so infected. And so that made it a real reality for me. And, my cousins have had it, my sister and brother-in-law have had it, but they weren't compromised. But my parents' friends that were in the nursing home were definitely compromised. And that was a real eye-opener, that I could name 6 people that died within 3 weeks after Mardi Gras.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's tough, and that's a lot of people's reality. And I think that thank you for sharing, and that does really make it seem real right there at the beginning. So just give a split second. Ginger, would you like to share something?
Well, I just think when it first started, I immediately thought this really is a pandemic and it's going to wipe us out in a hurry. Well, it's wiping us out, but not as fast as I immediately thought. But it is very real. My daughter-in-law is a respiratory therapist and works in a hospital, and those patients she works on are COVID patients. She has been tested positive twice, so has had to stay home in quarantine. But as it turned out, she really didn't have it, but took the precautions she needed to. Ellen's sister is a nurse, and her husband is a paramedic in Pensacola. So their busyness in hospital and with patients have made it very real to us. And I have a granddaughter who's CNA working in the hospital. So I felt that it's a pretty strong disease. And so we have to be careful, and wearing the mask and washing your hands and keeping distance is very little to pay to try to take care of yourselves. I don't understand people who think that's against their rights, that they have been told they have to wear a mask.
They're so selfish because I'm sorry, I'm Rick, I'm her son-in-law. To me, the people that don't wear a mask are being very selfish, because it's not them that could be, getting it, but they could be spreading it, to someone else.
Right.
exactly, Rick. Yeah, and I think you're right, Ginger and Rick, about those compromises that we're making. I love how Rob kind of mentions that every Sunday. Like, thank you for continuing to do some of this stuff that is inconvenient, but it is for the better of everybody, right? I think the thing that go ahead, Rick.
But with the cold weather, wearing a mask is not that bad. It actually keeps your face warm.
That's actually that's funny. Mary Catherine and I were joking about that last night. We're like, well, how come we haven't been wearing masks every winter? But
Yeah.
the thing that gets me down, I think, the most, just to be honest with you, around this is, not being with people. I don't think I want to keep doing that, obviously, because it's the best thing for everybody. But, not seeing people all the time is hard for me, because I like to be around people.
Hard for all of us.
So just want to throw that out there. Well, let's move on quickly to the theme. Why are we reading this book in Advent, God in the Pandemic, besides the fact that it's relevant? Obviously, we're all experiencing the pandemic in different ways. But what's the deal? Why is this an Advent book? Well, for me, go ahead, Eleanor, please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, please.
I think about waiting, that
Mhm.
we're all in a state of waiting for Christ to come again at Christmas. But we're also waiting for the danger of the pandemic to be over, so that we can go back to what we considered normal life. It may never be normal like it was, but hopefully better.
Please. Yes. So you are exactly right. And my whole, I was thinking about this morning, being a new member of clergy, ordained to the priesthood, God willing, in 2 weeks. And what do I think about Advent? And so in my last homily, I was talking about this idea of expectant joy, and I'm trying to make that like my thing. I don't know how long that's going to work for me, but for a little bit early in my ministry, right? Like I really feel like that sums up how I feel about Advent. And the same way about what you're talking about, Eleanor. There's a bit of joy in waiting for Christ's return, in the incarnation, the Christ child, and also in the second coming. But also there's the joy that we feel, hopefully, when the pandemic passes, whatever that means. You're right that maybe things won't go back to the exact way they were for a while at least, but the joy of being able to, and I'm just thinking about church life, to have coffee hour. That seems like a small kind of petty thing.
To hug people.
That's going to be really fun when it happens. And then being able to actually pass the peace besides, the weird elbow thing. I did that. I tried to elbow bump with somebody the other day and they didn't want to. So then I was just kind of like sticking my arm out. And that was really weird, because they weren't responding. But go ahead, Laura.
Well, I was just going to say, going along with waiting too, Henry Nouwen has a lot to say about waiting and how our, waiting is not really a passive thing. We participate in it. And I think the same thing, waiting for Advent and waiting for this pandemic to be over, it's how we participate. What we're doing during this time is very important. That make a difference. Wearing our masks and things like that shows that we're just not being passive while we're waiting.
You're exactly right. And those things that we're doing, as we've already said, are helping us, but they're also helping other people. So it's active in so many different ways, right? And so you're exactly right. Thank you. So that's what I feel. That's how I feel this book ties in. I think that makes sense. It sounds like everybody's on the same page there. The last thing I want to say before we jump in to these first 2 chapters is that just recognizing that this is a small book, and we're going to have 3 weeks of class, but we're going to have to, really dig deep to get a lot of discussion out of this. The first 2 chapters that we're going to look at today are 14 pages, but I've tried to pull out maybe some other, take some deeper dives into what N.T. Wright is mentioning and then see how we feel about that. So I think it's going to go well. I like what he has to say, especially in the next two, like next week when we get into chapters 3 and 4. I think there's a whole lot of good stuff in there. But chapter 2 today, I think, also has some really important things to look at. So I'm going to open it up for y'all first and just say, what struck you initially with this first chapter of the book? It's real short. He's talking about where we're starting, and we're just moving forward. I kind of love how he talks about the word pandemic, the way he starts, and I thought that was interesting. But I want to open it up to y'all and see if there's anything initially you'd like to bring up.
That's okay.
Well, on page 2, I like what he said about there is no neutral zone. During this, there's no medical equivalent of wartime Switzerland. And again, that goes back to, we can't just be passive. It's what we do during the time that's important.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if there was a timeout in neutral zone, but there isn't.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Like when he brings up wartime Switzerland, I didn't live through any great European wars. I know what he means by that. I know Switzerland remained neutral, and perhaps you could go there and feel like you weren't in the middle of something. But you're right, Laura. Like if we're retreating, like I'm about to go on vacation for a few days. I'm really excited about it. But I'm just going home. I'm not going anywhere, right? So I'm not going to get away from the pandemic because there's nowhere to go. So that feels kind of hard to say, but it's very true.
His Stoics and Epicureans and Platonists was sort of an interesting thought, I thought. And it sounded like we Christians are in the latter group more often than not, that this is that life as we are living it currently is just a shadow of reality that will come in the next life. But I do think that there are a lot of people who think, like the Stoics, that it's all programmed. There's nothing you can do about anything. Just go with the flow. And I think there are other people who feel strongly that the Epicureans have it right, that it's everything's random. That if you get shot, it's just because you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, which can happen certainly. But anyway. None of those satisfied totally, though.
Yeah, that's interesting. I love that. That's on page 2, if y'all are looking for that little bit, what Eleanor is referencing. But it's interesting, Eleanor, that I think there are many Christians also who would fall into a Stoic pattern, especially if you kind of believe in predestination, where God has determined everything that's going to happen in our life. And can we do anything about that? I don't subscribe to that necessarily, but there is a lot of that in the Christian theological ether. So interestingly, in some questions that I was coming up with, one of the things that some people were talking about were that the majority of Western culture now might fall into Epicureanism, what you're talking about, the random encounters. You can step across the street and get hit by a car at any time. And there's a cynicism that comes with that. And that nothing we can do necessarily can make anything right. So I think that, and then, is the next life, is the resurrection, is that kind of a Platonist idea? So here we are. We're still living apparently in ancient Greece in the 21st century, but there's a whole lot of that all over the world. So thank you for bringing that up. I also, just before we move on any further, I really have always been fascinated by this quote that he pulls forward on page 1, that apparently, I didn't know that this was attributed to a guy named Pastor Martin Niemöller, but once again, it's like a Second World War kind of quote. First, they came for the Jews, and I did nothing because I was not a Jew. And finally, it ends with, they came for me, but there was no one left to help me. Initially I was kind of like, what does that have to do with the pandemic? But I guess the way that I see it is, what are we doing to help each other? I think is the idea that where he's tying that in. And we've already covered that with wearing masks, washing our hands, and distancing is the best thing we can do to help each other. But I just wanted to point out that I've always been kind of fascinated by that quote.
I think I like that line that you said in today's world. Some Christians think we're in an opportunity to get people to turn to God.
Yeah,
And I do think that's right.
I
think
agree with you.
There are a lot who think, this may be the end of the world. I better get myself in shape.
Yeah, and he brings that up at the end of this chapter. So let's come back to that in just a sec, Ginger. And I want to hit back on that. But before we do, does anybody want to bring up something else from this chapter?
Can't help but point out on page 5,
Mhm.
the comparison with Hurricane Katrina. That hit home to me so
Yeah.
big time. That there
Yes.
we were. No one was helping us, just dying in the floods. And
Yeah.
I would have never thought of that as a comparison. And boy, did it hit home big time.
Yeah, Carol, and I love, I made note of that, and I love how he says, basically that this is the Katrina of the world, in a sense, but what it is doing, it's quoting him, it says, it shows that the political and social timbers have already been rotting away. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's tough. And I think that's even more true when I believe that was even more true when I was talking to my nurse friends last night, when they were describing who they saw being succumb to COVID early. And it was people who were at risk, which is for health concerns, obviously, but also those who are at risk without insurance, or like who maybe weren't within these social structures that I'm living in, right? I have health insurance, I and all that stuff. But they were saying, people initially were kind of the left behind folks in a sense. So that's very true. That's very sad.
Murdock, in 3 and 4, I think the big point on those 2 pages were that early Christians worked and had to help each other, and that the pagans didn't do that because medicine costs money, and the poor were poor because they were lazy or unlucky, and it wasn't society's job to look after them. And the Christians disagreed. So I think that he's saying that just like Ginger's relatives all are, I think, being extraordinary Christians by working to help those people who have the disease, the virus, and at their own demise, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting how he kind of follows that narrative where he says early Christians learned this from Jesus and the Jews who were doing this kind of work that was maybe outside the norm for society at the time. And then that has continued on into today, but he follows it by saying that's already a Christian response, I think is what you're pointing out. And that the world, he kind of says, has taken that on itself and says, no, we figured this out. It didn't have anything to do with Christianity. And I found that really interesting. But at the same time, I think, and what Carol was bringing up with Katrina, I think there is a sense, though, sometimes in the world that we want to blame people for their, where they are in life. Oh, they didn't work hard enough. I still think that exists in the world. And I think maybe that's just a natural tendency for some people. But we've got to work past it, obviously, and say, no, we still want to help them. So we want to help others. I think that's, I was reading about Advent and people say, we've got to put Christ back in Christmas. And the response I saw was, we got to put Christ back in Christmas by feeding people, welcoming the stranger, and being willing to forgive people for their shortcomings. And I was like, whoa, that really is putting Christ back in Christmas. So I don't know. I think that can tie into our Advent theme a little bit. Well, before we move on to chapter 2, I want to go back to what Ginger was bringing up, and it's at the end of chapter 5, where it says on page 5, excuse me, where it says a Christian response ? And then it kind of outlines some ways that N.T. Wright is seeing different responses. And he starts on chapter 5 saying, some are saying eagerly that this is the sign of the end. So this is where you see people, and he's framing this in a totally Christian response, right? Christians who are saying this is a sign of the end times. And we saw that in our gospel reading last Sunday, where it says the sun will be darkened, the stars are falling. Coronavirus is a sign of the end times. And N.T. Wright, I think, is saying no, not necessarily, but he brings up kind of some cultural bits, which would be like the Left Behind series. I don't know how much of this y'all have been exposed to, but being a former youth minister, I wasn't showing my kids the Left Behind series, but you would kind of get stuff in the mail because they would send it to a church and say, don't forget, there's a new Left Behind movie. So these are all about the rapture and those who are left behind because they weren't raptured. Interestingly, I was talking with a local pastor here yesterday, and he said this exact thing to me, that this is a sign of the end times, and that he's wondering if the rapture will be happening any moment. And I of course, all you can say is okay, okay, I didn't push back. I don't know, but it's just interesting to say or to think that, yeah, that is the way that some people see this, as opposed to wanting to go out and help people. It's kind of like, well, if you get left behind because of coronavirus, then sorry, I don't know. That's not the way that I see things. The next bit that he brings up is what I think Ginger was referring to, and that is, this is an opportunity for people to repent, basically, and turn to God, and we could evangelize. I think that's a valid response. He goes into that a little bit more, I think, in chapter 2. Is that what we're supposed to do? And then the final bit is another one where I push back a little bit and say, like, this isn't how I see things, but where this is God is angry at us, and this is the state of the world. And he kind of points out that often when people have this response, it's clearly people they don't agree with. They're the ones who are in the wrong. It's because of those people who are wanting to help people too much that God is mad. I don't know, but that's kind of where he goes with that. So 3 responses he's seen, and I'd love it if anybody wants to respond to any of that.
Murdock, I think he wanted.
Oh, please go ahead.
I thought he set a good tone for the whole book on page 3, where he said that the question should not be why, but what. What can we do? Mm-hmm. And I think if people waste a lot of energy and time asking why, mm-hmm. and he really points out in the later chapters that our response should be what? What can we do? I mean, the simple thing of wearing a mask is a Christian response for the reasons we've talked about.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I think that's what we're going into chapter 2 with that initial question is what should our response be? And we'll talk about that in a sec, but I think you're exactly right. And what we've already mentioned is that in our past, our history, our tradition, our Christian history, the response that we look back on and say that was the right response is an active response, helping other people, as opposed to pointing a finger or really questioning why is this happening. I think you're right on with that. It makes me think about, you hear about leper colonies, and I'm not talking about biblical, but after that, when people realized that you could touch someone and not necessarily contract this disease. And then you had these colonies that were often run by nuns, you know, and you hear that people were so scared to be there, but the real, you know, I don't know, just the beauty in thinking that these people were devoting their life to helping people that no one else wanted to be with. I don't know if I could necessarily say that I would make that choice, but it's such a beautiful thing to think about to me. So, and I think that that'll lead us right in to chapter 2, unless anybody else wants to bring something up. So reading the Old Testament, this was an interesting chapter, I thought. It hits on so many things that I think are difficult. And I don't think, I loved that N.T. Wright didn't necessarily dwell in responses to the Old Testament, where it's, you know, you're thinking about the angry God, the wrath of an angry God. And this is where we're, you know, you can obviously look to that and say that's what we're living through. But N.T. Wright was basically, his response is, what can we take from Scripture? And, you know, how do we sit with it ourselves? So I really loved especially the end of this chapter, but there's a lot to get through before that. So I'm going to open it up briefly and see if there's anything particular that stuck out to you. Well, I'm going to say that the first thing that stuck out to me was on page 8, at the very top of the page, where he says, actions have consequences and so does inaction.
Yes.
And I think this kind of continues of what we've already talked about. You know, our response is active, but it's also, some of that activity is in just wearing a mask, washing our hands. That's an active response. To me, an inactive response to the pandemic is to not do those things, which is almost antithetical if you think about it. You know, going to a store without a mask, well, that's active, but it's actually an inactive response to coronavirus in a way. So I think that you could take those two sentences and really get deep into, like, what's the inaction of certain people that we don't like, or something that's maybe led to some more other things. But we don't have to do that. I think his bit is just putting that out there and saying, okay, that's a great little quib, and we need to stick with it. Let's keep our active responses.
This is Rick. I don't know. Yeah, get my head in there sideways. I'm thinking that, you know, because of the isolation that everybody's going through, there's been a lot of education about phone and the Zoom and everything else, you know, because I've watched Sunday Mass, you know, on TV, and you're making activities and joining people together here, you know, by being able to comment on things.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Thank you, Rick. I appreciate that. It is active. I mean, learning how to do Zoom, I had to learn. That was an active response. Frustrating at times, but active nonetheless. I'd say, just to stay on page 8 briefly, there was a line in here that really took me back to the beginning of this whole ordeal in March. Before I was living in Cashers, I was living in Swanee, and on the university campus, right? And he talks about the streets of Oxford being empty of students, and how that image haunts him. And that really took me back to Swanee, when none of the undergraduates came back after spring break. You know, those of us who are seminarians, we lived there. Like, we moved to Swanee and lived there for 3 years. You know, the undergrads are coming and going and doing all this stuff. And then none of them came home or came back to Swanee after spring break. And it was so sad. Just because you're at this beautiful campus and there's no one there. And that really just struck me when he brought that up in correlation to Jerusalem in the Babylonian exile. So that, I love that he tied that in, because it felt really at home to me, kind of in a sad way, honestly. But we're talking about Lamentations, so very appropriate.
I think it's kind of sad that you came here in a new world and you're having to meet people, but you don't know who they are behind a mask. So,
Well, yes, we could dwell on my lamentation of moving to Cashers during the pandemic for 3 weeks easily, but we're not going to. But thank you, Ginger. Not because I'm not happy to be here, but because of what you're talking about. It's been hard to get to know people via Zoom and whatnot, but we're getting there. So would anyone else love to bring up anything from chapter 2? Because
Well,
I think-
8 and 9, pages 8 and 9, it brings me back to your last book with Beth Heard Evans, or Evans Heard.
Rachel Held Evans, yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And it's looking at those parts of scripture where there's ill fortune and ill behavior are have a causal effect.
Mhm.
And the Psalms, Daniel, it's very hard to hear that, that God gets mad at us, really mad at us, and bad things happen.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's basically where I want to dwell for a little bit, Eleanor, if y'all don't mind. What N.T. Wright does here, yeah, what N.T. Wright does here is he gives us all these little bits of Lamentations, bit of Psalms, and he also refers to Daniel and to the book of Job. And what I'd like to do is look at some of these lines from these bits of scripture and think about how they feel to us. I first would love to know if many of you have ever kind of sat with Lamentations or Psalm 88, particularly Psalm 88, which I think is the saddest part of our sacred scripture. It's a terribly sad psalm. And if we just want to move over just and look at that. So he, on page 11 and 12, he gives us a section of Psalm 88. And I'm going to read it for us. And then he's only giving us a section, but I think what he does is it really does kind of sum up how it goes. So the section he gives us is, my soul is full of troubles, and my life draws near to Sheol. I am counted among those who go down to the pit. I am like those who have no help, like those forsaken among the dead, like the slain that lie in their grave. And then he's skipping ahead toward the end of the psalm. O Lord, why do you cast me off? Why do you hide your face from me? Wretched and close to death from my youth up, I suffer your terrors. I am desperate. And then this is the last line of this psalm. You have caused friend and neighbor to shun me. My companions are in darkness. This is, I believe this is the only psalm that ends without a little bit of a turn to praise. I might be wrong about that, but it's definitely one of the only ones that does, where it literally ends with the word darkness, and that's also in Hebrew. So they've made this sentence kind of fit correctly to how the psalm ends. And it's very sad, and I love that he is bringing this forward for us. Not necessarily to say, like, look, God is mad at you, but the psalmist is upset because he's been shut off. And I think that is applicable here. Especially if we think about some of our friends who maybe have been isolating completely, they're afraid for their health. And so they're not wanting to be around people at all. That kind of isolation is tough. I don't think it's good for us. But yeah, where he's saying, I'm shut off from my friends. This is the psalmist. And that's sad. And often we can blame God. And I think that's what the psalmist is doing. Why, Lord? Why do you cut me off? So I don't know. I'm curious how y'all felt about that bit of scripture that he kind of leads us to.
Well, I think it's kind of almost in a way to know that, we all go through dark times, and this is something we don't just experience ourselves. And when you read things like this, you realize, okay, so it is, I think, as he says at the very end of the chapter, it is okay to lament. It is okay to call out to God and to complain, even, to say why, and then realize that just leave it at that, because we don't know the why, and that's not, we're never going to really know the why. But some things we just have to say to get them out, I think sometimes.
Yeah. So I'm right with you, Laura. I'm glad that you said that, because for me, when I came to that realization, maybe in my faith a little bit, that you read Psalm 88 or you read the book of Job or Lamentations. I haven't read Lamentations since I was a junior in seminary. It's long. But you read those and you realize exactly what you're saying. And I think where N.T. Wright is taking us, that it is okay. And it's actually part of our tradition to understand or try to recognize that sometimes it's out of our control and that we are going to be sad. And that we have these bits of scripture where we can look to and say, this is something that, the composer of the Psalms felt. Perhaps, maybe David, a great person in our tradition. And I just, when I recognized that, I then kind of took a step back, and I think he alludes to this in this chapter, where he goes, our faith isn't necessarily always about us being happy. I think that we often we want to look like, we want to put that forward in culture or in society, and that's okay. But when we're talking to God sometimes, and and Jesus calls us to to go into your closet, basically would be one translation, and pray by yourself. And when you're in that time, we should feel like we can say, gosh, this isn't going that well. What and I'm upset about it. God, be with me. Where are you? It feels like you're not here, but I know you're here. Go ahead.
Well, Ginger, you and some of the others will remember who we heard say this, I need you, God, and I need you right now.
Yeah, so I feel like often we're not encouraged to do that. And I think that N.T. Wright, at least here, and other writers obviously want us to recognize that. And when he goes from Psalm 88 to the book of Job, where he's mostly just mentioning the book of Job, but if we remember, basically he's saying, he's kind of going against what Job's friends are saying. Job's friends come to him and he's like, it must have been something you did. You sinned, or your dad sinned, or your mom sinned, and because of that, God's punishing you. And as N.T. Wright says, the readers of the book of Job, we're in on it from the beginning, and that's not true. God recognizes that Job is basically the most righteous person in the land, and I'm just going to do this to him to see what happens. Now that's tough. But I think it's important, what N.T. Wright is at least reminding us, is that we know that Job's friends are wrong, and they're blaming him the whole time. And at the end, what he gets to, N.T. Wright is basically says, there's no response. Now, for some people, at least I know some of my friends who I've read the book of Job with, they don't like that. They don't like the end of the book of Job, where God basically says, okay, everything's going to be all right now. I just want to see what happens. But I think N.T. Wright's point, and I'd love to hear what y'all think, is the same way that we were just talking about, trying to put it into God's hands and calling out to God, lamenting, is where I see the book of Job as being helpful. And basically that line, when God responds to Job and says, like, where were you when I created the universe? For me, that's one of the most comforting lines in the Bible. That's not the same for everybody, but I just love that, because it kind of is freeing almost to me to say,
True.
put it into God's hands and see what happens. But
And I have to go, but I wanted to mention that Jesus quoted that the 22nd Psalm, you know, why have you forsaken me, Father? Why have you forsaken me? And so even Jesus, it seems to me, had his time of lamentation and darkness. And if Jesus can get through it, certainly he was sinless. So anyway, I
Yeah.
just want to mention that. I got to go. I'm so sorry. Thank you. I love the class.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, so I'd love for us to open it back up. I didn't mean to talk so much, but those are the bits of this chapter that really stuck out to me, and I found to be very comforting. And I really loved where N.T. Wright was going with that. And I'd love to know if anything particular stuck out to you.
Okay, Murdock?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I loved the part where, again, what John said, the question isn't why, but what can we do?
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we choose the response to touch the untouchables like Jesus did, in other words, to be like your nurse friends who have gone in to taking care of COVID patients, that is touching the untouchables, but hopefully with the right protective gear. But when we go to that place of putting our life on the line, that is what makes our life so meaningful. It's better than the comfortable life. It's better than the Epicurean life, because it's a life that has deep meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when you sense, I think you can sense God's presence with you.
Mm-hmm.
You may have chaos outside, but peace inside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you, Lawson. That's wonderful. I think you're exactly right. At least knowing that you can feel God's presence in that work. I mean, that is very true. Very true. Well, the last thing I want to leave us with, and I'm not saying we have to end this, but is that the very part of chapter 14 that I think, Laura, you already took us there. But I just want to just say that again.
Page 14.
Page 14. Do I keep saying chapter? I'm sorry. Is basically the whole point is that we must lament. I feel like that stating that really is freeing to me. As N.T. Wright says, state the case and leave it to God on page 14. And that's part of our tradition, is that we're called, as in our sacred scripture, to lament, and it's okay. And I just want to restate that and just say that really felt true to me. And I think that often it is lacking a little bit too much in our culture to have that freeing nature to say, I'm not okay with this. This is hard for me. Please God be with me. So I think where he ends that on chapter 14 or page 14 is just wonderful. And like I said, I want to give us a little bit of homework. Not really homework, but when I was doing some preparation for the class, I came across some materials that say, when we're talking about lamentation, when we're talking about these psalms of lament, and thinking about how this is in some way antithetical to a lot of what we hear in our culture or our life, that trying to write a prayer of lament ourselves can be helpful. So this isn't homework in the sense that we're going to come back and share them, but I'd love for all of us within the next week to maybe sit down and write a prayer of lament, whether that be around coronavirus or around anything in our lives that it seems like we want to remember in a way that the psalmists remember, right? And so the exercise I was looking at gives you some helpful little bits. Obviously, reading sections of the Book of Lamentations or reading the whole of Psalm 88. These are examples of lament in the Bible. And I'm going to give us just quickly some other psalms that we could look to if you want to, and I'll read them slowly. But it would be Psalm 44, Psalm 60, Psalm 74, Psalm 79, Psalm 80, Psalm 85, and lastly, Psalm 90. So these are all examples, some of which M.T. Wright referenced, I believe, but maybe not, of what people call Psalms of Lament. And then the Book of Lamentations is pretty self-explanatory. It is a lament of the destruction, the initial destruction of Jerusalem in the Babylonian exile. These are all beautiful, and I think that it can open up a little bit of what N.T. Wright's talking about how we are called to lament to God, and maybe help us write a prayer of lament for ourselves. And then when we come back next Thursday, like I said, this isn't homework that we're going to share, but I might ask you, and I might share myself because I'm going to do it also, how that felt. Did it feel weird? Did it feel like it helped you express something, or did it feel like that was worthless? Anyway, these are going to be worthwhile things to think about. And just real quick, I'm going to open it up for any closing thoughts that anybody might have, and then I'm just going to remind us of what we're going to read for next week. Well, so for next week, we're going to look at chapters 3 and 4, and I think that these are good. These are great. This takes us out of the Old Testament into Jesus in the New Testament. And I think N.T. Wright does some of the same stuff again. He's wanting us to look at Scripture and see how that can help us inform our response to the coronavirus. Now, we've already said this is a short book, but these are a little bit longer than chapter 1 and 2. I'm going to imagine that most people have read a lot of this book already, but chapter 3 and 4, I'm going to go back over it again. And then we'll also, when we open up, just talk about how if any of us followed through and wrote a prayer of lamentation and how that made us feel. And I hope that's a good exercise for us. So that is all I have for today. I really appreciate y'all being here, and I hope that the book feels like we're gonna, maybe not get all the answers we're looking for, but at least have some discussions about it. And I think that's the fun of doing this together.
I think it was real good, and it's good to have the discussion.
Yeah, thanks a lot, y'all. I love doing these classes with everybody, so I really appreciate y'all participating, and I look forward to the discussion next week. And like I said, I'm going to take a little time off, so I won't see you this Sunday. If you are coming to church, I will be, I don't know I might go to Swanee to see my father-in-law, but I'm not sure yet. I might just stay here because that might be the safest thing to do, right? That's the active response, is staying put. So maybe I should follow my own advice. And I'm just going to enjoy, having a little bit of free time, and I think it's going to be nice. But I will be back next Thursday for our class. So I will see you then. I guess I'll see some of you tonight at the parish meeting if you attend. Don't forget, 5 o'clock on Zoom.
Right.
Thanks a lot, y'all.
Bye.
Really enjoyed it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Murdock.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.